You have been slugged with higher prices on everything from your morning coffee to your kids' sneakers. All because some suit in the White House decided to play economic cowboy with your wallet. Billions siphoned off in tariffs that weren't paid by foreigners, but by you, the American consumer, in the form of sticker shock at every store. And now, the Supreme Court might just pull the plug, forcing the government to cough up refunds that could top $1 trillion. But here's the gut punch. That money, it goes back to the corporations, not to you. Welcome to the great tariff theft of 2025, where the House always wins unless the gavel drops. Welcome to Your Neighbor on the Left, podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your host. In this episode, we're going to talk about the latest chapter in the horror story that is this administration's tariff policy, as though you can nail it down to one coherent policy, that is. That's being the upcoming SCOTUS review of its legality. We're also going to talk about E. Jean Carroll, the Smithsonian Institute, and also a topic near and dear to me, International Literacy Day. So let's dive into some hot topics. So picture, if you can, a nation's history, once a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, slowly unraveling under the stroke of a political pen. Artifacts that tell stories of slavery, genocide, and resilience, gone, reframed or buried to fit a glossy narrative of unblemished glory. And it's not just in museums. It's seeping into your child's classroom, where teachers scramble for truth amid the whitewash. In 2025, under President Trump, the Smithsonian, the people's repository of the past, is under siege. This isn't preservation, it's revisionism with a partisan edge. And the real victims are students, our educators, and the soul of a democracy that thrives on honest reckoning. If we let this stand, we're not just rewriting history, we're dooming the next generation to repeat its darkest chapters. The Trump administration's aggressive push to overhaul the Smithsonian institution, America's premier keeper of history, is far from a dusty internal audit. This review could ripple into classrooms nationwide, sanitizing the very materials teachers rely on to educate our kids. It started with a letter from the White House last month, August 12th to be exact, demanding a, quote, comprehensive internal review, end quote, of the Smithsonian's public-facing content, from exhibition texts and websites to educational resources. The stated goal? To, quote, assess tone, historical framing, and alignment with American ideals, end quote. All in service of celebrating American exceptionalism by scrubbing out, quote, divisive or partisan narratives, end quote. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Except when you peel back the layers, it's a blatant effort to whitewash the uncomfortable truths: slavery, racism, imperialism, the very chapters that make our triumphs meaningful. And here's the kicker. In a country founded on questioning authority, the administration wants museums to toe the line of uplifting patriotism, as if ignoring the sins of the past makes us exceptional. It just makes us forgetful. This isn't about education, it's about indoctrination. And the fallout? Teachers like Katharina Matro in Maryland, who pulls Smithsonian primary sources for lessons on genocide and slavery, now wonder if she can trust them at all anymore. Quote, "We don't want a partisan history," she says. "We want history that's produced by real historians," end quote. So let's recap Trump's broader crusade to rewrite history, dive into this Smithsonian showdown, and explore the devastating ripple effects on education, because, make no mistake, this damages our country by eroding trust in institutions, guts our education system by limiting honest resources, and betrays our students' future by denying them the tools to build a more just society. To understand the Smithsonian Review, we need context, because this isn't a one-off. Since taking office in January, the Trump administration has been on a mission to, quote, "restore truth and sanity," end quote, to American history, as they so piously put it. It kicked off with Executive Order 14021 on March 27th, restoring truth and sanity to American history. That gem directed federal agencies, including museums and parks, to transform historical sites into, quote, "solemn and uplifting public monuments," end quote, that emphasize patriotism over, well, facts. Translation: ditch the nuance, amp up the glory. Remember the 1776 commission from Trump's first term? Revived and supercharged this year, it's back as, quote, "the American Patriotic Education Initiative," end quote, pumping out materials that glorify the founders while downplaying slavery and indigenous displacement. Then there's the Education Department's launch of the Founders Museum in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, in partnership with PragerU, that conservative video mill known for its cherry-picked takes on history. Education Secretary Linda McMahon gushed in a PragerU video, quote, "real patriotic education means that just as our founders loved and honored America, so should we honor them," end quote. It nods to abolitionists and even includes Phyllis Wheatley, the enslaved poet. But critics, and there are many, say it glosses over the founders' own ties to slavery. So, yes, honor them by airbrushing the chains, because nothing says exceptionalism like selective amnesia. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2025, Trump escalates, blasting the Smithsonian for being out of control and including negative parts of history like exhibits on slavery. The August 12th letter targeted 8 museums, ordering a review of everything from social media to curatorial processes. It's all tied to that executive order aiming to purge woke elements, which is code for anything that challenges the myth of flawless greatness. Scholars like Harvard's Annette Gordon-Reed have called it a whitewashing of history, reminiscent of McCarthy-era censorship. Even the Smithsonian's own secretary, Lonnie Bunch, fired back in a September 3rd letter reaffirming the institution's independence and vowing to conduct its own review, not the White House's. But here's the damage already unfolding. This isn't isolated. It's part of a pattern, banning books, restricting discussions of racism in schools, and now infiltrating the Smithsonian, which has long been a beacon of balanced scholarship. By framing honest history as divisive, The administration isn't protecting America, it's fracturing it, ensuring future generations inherit a hollowed-out narrative that can't withstand scrutiny. And the front lines? Our classrooms. So what's exactly in this review? The White House letter spells it out. A deep dive into the Smithsonian's exhibitions, materials, and operations across its 21 museums, research centers, and the National Zoo. They're interviewing curators, analyzing exhibit texts, and scrutinizing educational content for anything that doesn't scream Americanism. The goal, as per the administration, is alignment with Trump's vision. No more partisan narratives on topics like civil rights or colonial atrocities. Take, for instance, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Their exhibits on slavery and Jim Crow, under the microscope. Or the National Museum of the American Indian, with its unflinching look at genocide and displacement. Expect major pushback. Even recent projects, like a 2020 video series on anti-Asian racism, co-created by Professor Russell Young, could get shelved. Young told the AP he fears the loss of national recognition for these stories. And how could he not? Because apparently, celebrating exceptionalism means ignoring how that exceptionalism was built on exploitation. The Smithsonian, founded in 1846 as the nation's attic, has always balanced inspiration with interrogation. Post-World War II, it ramped up classroom materials, worksheets, videos, workshops, vetted by experts. Now, with federal funding on the line, curators face a chilling effect: self-censor or risk defunding. Bunch's response was a masterclass in defiance. "We reaffirm our authority over our programming," he wrote, setting up an internal team to handle it, without White House meddling. But the administration hasn't backed down. They've vowed to expand this to other museums. The Organization of American Historians called it unprecedented and dismaying, warning of politicized history. This isn't stewardship, it's sabotage. By injecting ideology into neutral spaces, Trump is not elevating America. He's undermining the very institutions that help us grow from our past. And when those institutions feed education, the harm multiplies. Now, the real tragedy. This Smithsonian purge doesn't stay in D.C. It invades classrooms across the country. More than 80% of history teachers use free resources from federal institutions like the Smithsonian. This is per a 2024 American Historical Association survey. Why? Because budgets are tight, textbooks are outdated, and time is always short. Teachers like the one I mentioned in Maryland trust the Smithsonian's digitized artifacts, no vetting needed. "I don't have to figure out, is this information real?" she says. But if those materials get sanitized, good luck filling in the gaps. In Alaska, Michael Hyman uses virtual Smithsonian tours for scavenger hunts on inclusive exhibits. He worries it'll alienate students of color, like Native kids, turning them off history altogether. "We are further quieting voices that are important to our country," he lamented, restricting underrepresented youth from understanding their past. Tina Ellsworth of the National Council for the Social Studies echoes this. Teachers are leery of partisan sources, as they poison good practice. "Oh, but the PragerU videos will be available. Those are fine because nothing teaches critical thinking like a scripted founder fanfic." Brendan Gillis of the AHA calls federal resources profoundly important for social studies. a bipartisan investment now under threat. States with anti-CRT laws are already navigating minefields, and this amps it up nationwide. So then, what's the damage? Well, to education, teachers can adapt, but at what cost? Rushed, biased lessons? To the country, a divided populace blind to systemic flaws, ripe for manipulation. To students, deprived of full context, they can't innovate or empathize, hobbling America's future as a diverse powerhouse. Historian Sam Redman notes his grad students once dreamed of Smithsonian jobs. Now, not so much. This erodes trust, fosters ignorance, and weakens all of us. So to sum up, Trump's Smithsonian review, rooted in a year-long whitewash campaign, is not patriotism. It's peril. It guts reliable education, silences marginalized voices, and leaves students with a brittle version of America that can't endure. We damage our country by politicizing truth, our schools by starving them of resources, and our future by raising generations unequipped for complexity. On September 8th, the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld an $83.3 million defamation judgment against President Donald Trump in favor of E. Jean Carroll. That's on top of the $5 million she won earlier this year for sexual assault and defamation, another ruling the court greenlit as fair and reasonable. Now, for those who don't know the story, if there could possibly be any of you, Carroll, the veteran advice columnist, accused Trump of sexually assaulting her in a Bergdorf Goodman dressing room in the mid-1990s. Trump didn't just deny it, he trashed her relentlessly on social media, calling her a liar, a fame seeker, and worse. Juries in 2023 and 2024 didn't buy his spin. They found him liable and hit him with these massive penalties. Trump's response? A barrage of appeals, delays, and what can only be described as a masterclass in dodging accountability. Because nothing says innocent like throwing every legal Hail Mary while your lawyers cry immunity from the Oval Office. But the appeals court wasn't having it. In a unanimous smackdown, they rejected claims of biased juries, excessive damages, and, most crucially, Trump's bid to hide behind presidential immunity. This isn't just a win for Carroll. It's a stark reminder of Trump's pattern. Discredit the victim, weaponize the system, and surround yourself with enablers who do the same. Let's break down his evasion tactics, the DOJ's complicit role, and how this fits a broader administration theme of protecting predators. Because when the powerful evade justice, it poisons the well for everyone else. So let's start with the ruling itself, because it's a blueprint of Trump's playbook to wriggle free. The $83.3 million stemmed from a January 2024 verdict. Trump defamed Carroll in 2019 by denying her assault claim and saying she fabricated it for political gain. Even after his first $5 million loss in May of 2023, where a jury found him liable for sexual abuse but not rape, he kept the attacks coming on Truth Social, amplifying the damage. Trump's appeal? A multi-pronged assault. First, he claimed the jury was tainted, pulled from a liberal New York poll, somehow predisposed against him. Second, he argued the damages were grossly excessive, punishing him for statements made as president. But the real gem? Presidential immunity. Citing the Supreme Court's July 2024 Trump v. United States ruling, which shielded, quote, official acts, end quote. His team said his defamatory tweets were protected speech from the White House. The appeals court? They called it nonsense. In their opinion, Trump's rants were Private conduct, not official duties. No immunity shield. The jury's damages awards are fair and reasonable, they wrote flatly. And the delays? Trump posted a $91.6 million bond in March of 2024 to pause enforcement while appealing, buying time as his finances swirled in chaos from other cases. Now, with the loss, he's likely eyeing the Supreme Court, where his immunity argument might get a friendlier ear from the conservative majority he helped shape. But let's be clear. These aren't defenses. They're dodges. Trump has smeared Carol as a whack job and saying she's not my type from the start, turning her credible testimony into a punchline. It's classic victim blaming, eroding public trust in survivors and the justice system. Immunity for defamation. That's rich coming from a guy who brags about locking her up if he were a dictator for a day. This isn't lawyering, it's privilege play, and it sets a dangerous precedent. When the top dog can delay and deny, everyday victims get sidelined. And now, what's probably the ugliest layer, Trump's use of the Department of Justice to bolster his escape hatch. As president, he didn't just hire private lawyers. He leaned on the very agency meant to enforce impartial justice. In a bold move, Trump's team invoked the Westfall Act, a 1988 law shielding federal employees from personal liability by substituting the United States as defendant. Translation: let the DOJ step in, claim sovereign immunity, and potentially wipe the slate clean. The appeals court docs reveal the maneuver. Trump sought DOJ certification to represent him on appeal, arguing his presidency made him a federal employee whose statements were official. Carol's lawyers fought back, saying the act bars substitution mid-appeal and doesn't cover willful defamation anyway. The court agreed, denying the swap and keeping Trump on the hook personally. But the attempt? It's a glaring abuse of power. With Attorney General Pam Bondi, of course a Trump loyalist, in charge, the DOJ filed supportive briefs echoing his immunity claims and delaying proceedings. Law and order indeed. When it's your order, the DOJ becomes your personal shield. This isn't protection for officials. It's weaponization against accusers. Carol called it terrifying, a perversion of justice that chills other victims from speaking out in a nation where the powerful can co-opt the enforcers. Equality under law becomes a joke. This case, of course, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's the poster child for Trump's lifelong theme of discrediting victims. From the Access Hollywood tape to over 25 accusers, his response is rote: deny, defame, destroy. Carol's ordeal? Just the latest, amplified by his platform to sow doubt and rally his base. Post-verdict, he doubled down on Truth Social, calling the rulings rigged, and her a con artist. It's not a defense. It's a blueprint for predators everywhere. Attack the messenger, and the message fades. And of course, Trump isn't alone in his administration. His 2025 White House and cabinet are a rogues gallery of alleged abusers, signaling that predation is par for the course. He had Matt Gaetz, who was his nominee for Attorney General, under DOJ investigation for sex trafficking minors until he withdrew the nomination. Yet Trump praised him as fantastic. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faces multiple sexual assault claims from his Fox News days. RFK Jr., now his HHS head, settled a lawsuit for groping a nanny. And, of course, don't forget Elon Musk, who isn't in the inner circle anymore. And then, of course, there's the the Epstein whispers that Trump dismisses now as a Democratic hoax. A cabinet full of alpha males who treat women as conquests. Shocking, right? This isn't coincidence. It's culture. By elevating enablers, Trump normalizes disbelief, eroding Me Too gains, and scaring survivors silent. The damage? A society where power trumps truth, justice lags behind, and victims are the ones who pay the price. In the end, this upheld ruling is a rare check on Trump's evasion empire, but with SCOTUS looming and the DOJ in his pocket, the fight is far from over. It underscores a very toxic theme. Discredit victims, deploy the state against them, and build an admin that protects its own. This weakens our democracy, silences women, and mocks accountability. So this episode will be released on September 9th, but as I record it on September 8th, today is International Literacy Day. That's right, today we're celebrating the power of reading and writing. But we're also shining a light on a crisis that's closer to home than you might think. Literacy isn't just about books. It's about unlocking opportunities, understanding the world, and building a better future. I want to share some eye-opening stats on literacy in the U.S., explain why this issue is so critical, tell a few heartbreaking stories of students who slipped through the cracks, and point you towards some amazing organizations where you can make a difference. First off, what exactly is International Literacy Day? Established by UNESCO back in 1966, it's observed every year on September 8 to raise awareness about the importance of literacy as a fundamental human right. Globally, we're talking about efforts to combat illiteracy in developing countries. But here's the thing. It hits home in the United States, too. Even in one of the world's most advanced nations, literacy challenges persist, affecting millions of lives. So let's talk about numbers, because the statistics on U.S. literacy rates might surprise you. According to recent data, about 79% of American adults are considered literate, which sounds decent at first. But that means a staggering 21%, or roughly 43 million adults, have low literacy skills, struggling with basic reading, writing, and comprehension. To put that in perspective, that's more people than the entire population of California. And it gets worse. Over half of U.S. adults, about 54%, have literacy levels below a 6th grade equivalent. Recent assessments show that only 44% of adults score at a proficient level, meaning they can handle complex texts and tasks. And that's down from previous years. Among younger folks, the nation's report card from 2024 reveals declines in reading scores for 4th and 8th graders, with average scores dropping by 2 points since 2022. These aren't just abstract figures. They represent real barriers in everyday life, from filling out job applications to understanding medical instructions. Now, why is this such a big deal? Literacy isn't a luxury. It's the foundation for everything. Beyond being a basic right, it directly impacts our economy, health, and society. People with low literacy skills earn less, face higher poverty rates, and rack up more healthcare costs because they struggle to navigate systems like insurance forms or prescription labels. In fact, adults with low literacy are 26% less likely to land a job. On a broader scale, low literacy hampers economic growth. Think about innovation and productivity suffering when a chunk of the workforce can't fully engage. It affects public health, too. Illiterate individuals are more prone to misunderstandings that lead to preventable illnesses. And don't get me started on civic engagement. How can we have a healthy democracy if people can't read ballots, news articles, or policy documents critically? UNESCO puts it perfectly. Literacy expands capabilities, reduces poverty, and improves lives overall. With 59 million adults at the lowest literacy levels, we're talking about a national issue that cost the U.S. billions in lost productivity and social services. If we don't address this, we're leaving generations behind. But numbers only tell part of the story. Let's make this personal with some anecdotes that highlight how the system fails some students. Take Deborah Prestilio, a 41-year-old woman from Baltimore who graduated from Patterson High School in 1999. Despite walking across that stage with the diploma in her hand, she still struggles to read basic text today. Imagine the frustration. Years later, she's reflecting on how the education system pushed her through without ensuring she had the fundamentals. Then there's Alicia Ortiz from Hartford, Connecticut. At 19, she graduated from Hartford Public High School, but she can't read or write at all. Her story led to a lawsuit against the school district, alleging they prioritized graduation rates over actual learning. Alicia was even an honor student with a 3.4 GPA. How in the hell does that happen? Her family claims the school failed to provide proper special education support, essentially promoting her despite her illiteracy. These aren't isolated cases. Stories like this pop up across the country where pressure to boost graduation numbers leads to kids being passed along without the skills they need. One educator shared on social media about a high school senior who couldn't read his own assignments but was set to graduate anyway, leaving his father shocked and heartbroken. It's a systemic failure that robs these young people of their potential and sets them up for a lifetime of challenges. The good news? There are incredible organizations out there fighting this battle every day, and you can help by donating or volunteering. Start with Pro-Literacy, the world's leader in adult education. They support programs across the U.S. to teach reading and writing to adults who missed out earlier in life. Then there's Reading is Fundamental, or RIF, which focuses on inspiring kids to love reading by providing books and resources to underserved communities. Reach Out and Read integrates literacy into pediatric care, giving books to families during doctor visits to build early reading habits. And don't forget the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, which works on intergenerational programs to help parents and kids learn together, breaking the cycle of low literacy. These groups are making real change, but they rely on donations to keep going. Even a small contribution can provide books and tutoring or advocacy that transform lives. Literacy is the key to empowerment, whether it's through stats that show the scale of the problem, stories that break your heart, or the vital work of organizations stepping up. We all have a role to play. If you're able, head over to one of those sites today and donate. Or simply pick up a book and read to a child in your life. It starts with us. Today's deep dive pertains to the tariff train wreck that's got the Trump administration sweating bullets. If you've felt the pinch of pricier imports since April, yeah, that's on you, courtesy of President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. These beauties slapped a 10% baseline on almost everything coming into the U.S., jacking up to 50% or more for our favorite trade foes like China. We're talking nearly 70% of the U.S. goods imports getting hammered, according to the Tax Foundation. But hold on to your receipts, folks, because a federal appeals court just called BS on the whole scheme. Last month, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled 7-4 that most of these reciprocal tariffs are flat out illegal. Trump dashed to the Supreme Court for an expedited smackdown, begging for arguments in November and a ruling by early next year. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's out there on NBC Meet the Press, all puffed up and confident it'll win. But then he drops the bomb. If SCOTUS voids it, the Treasury has to refund about half of the tariffs collected so far. And get this, Bessent warns it could hit $750 billion to $1 trillion if the court's dallying drags into the summer of 2026. Oh, the horror. For them. For us, it's the sweet sound of karma, I guess. Because, let's be real, tariffs have been a rotten idea from day one. They're not some magical shield for American workers. They're a tax on you and me, inflating prices and enriching importers who pass the buck. And now, the prospect of refunds. It turns that money grab into straight-up theft. Government-sanctioned pickpocketing exposed in court. So let's unpack why SCOTUS might axe these tariffs, how the refund circus would play out. Spoiler, it's a nightmare. And why none of that cash is coming back to the consumers who actually paid the price. So let's start at the beginning of this legal dumpster fire. On what basis could the Supreme Court void these tariffs? Buckle up, because it's a masterclass in presidential overreach. Back in April 2025, Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. For those who like acronyms that could sound like spy gadgets. He did this via Executive Order 14257. He declared a national emergency over trade deficits and domestic manufacturing deficiencies, then whacked importers with these reciprocal tariffs. Sounds tough, right? Like America's finally fighting back. Wrong. It's a con. The U.S. Court of International Trade first smacked it down, and on August 29th, the Federal Circuit upheld that ruling 7-4. Why? Because IEEPA doesn't give the president carte blanche to play taxman. It lets him regulate imports during emergencies, like banning or quantifying stuff, but it sure doesn't say, slap on tariffs and duties. That's taxation, folks, and the Constitution reserves that power for Congress, not the Oval Office. Oh, but the administration's like, come on, it's just regulation. Yes, and I'm the Queen of England. The court called BS, citing the major questions doctrine. Remember that? SCOTUS's favorite tool for slapping down executive power grabs on big ticket issues. These tariffs, massive economic nukes, projected to rake in $2.3 to $3.3 trillion over time. No way Congress hid that kind of authority in the IEEPA without a neon sign saying tariffs are okay here. Don't get me started on the non-delegation doctrine. Handing the president unlimited power to hike tariffs without Congress providing an intelligible principle. That's separation of powers shredded like yesterday's news. The judges even distinguished it from dusty old precedents from 1975, which okayed limited surcharges under a different law. Trump's version, quote, unbounded in scope, amount, and duration, as the Federal Circuit Court put it in their opinion. this isn't just legalese. It's a slap in the face to democratic rule. Trump bypassed Congress because he knew they'd never sign off on taxing Americans to the tune of trillions. And for what? To liberate us from cheap imports? Please. These tariffs jacked up costs on everything from electronics to autos, hitting low-income families the hardest. From the jump, economists screamed it was a bad idea. Protectionism 101 that backfires into inflation and job losses in import-dependent sectors. The Tax Foundation pegged it an extra $1,300 per household in 2025 alone. Theft, plain and simple. Now the appeals court paused enforcement until October 14th, giving Trump time to beg SCOTUS. He's pushing for November arguments. Smart, since a delay means more cash collected before any refund party. But with the conservative majority, they love executive power in immigration. Trump versus Hawaii, as an example. But the major questions doctrine might bite back. Historical precedent, mixed. If they rule against, it's game over for the tariffs fever dream. And as far as Bessent's confidence, that's code for please don't make us admit we stole from our own people. We'll circle back to his pearl clutching in a bit. So let's say this happens. All right, tariffs voided. Poof. What happens next? A bureaucratic bonanza of refunds that's equal parts comedy and catastrophe. If SCOTUS sides with the appeals court, the government must, and I know you can't see, but I'm doing air quotes around must refund duties already collected. And this is according to Customs and Border Protection rules. Bessent, in his Meet the Press interview, admitted it'd be about half the tariffs, calling it terrible for the Treasury. Here's a quote from Bessent himself whining about the mess. Quote, delaying the ruling until June 2026 could result in unwinding them could cause significant disruption. End quote. Sounds like a guy who knows he's got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. How would it even work? Well, step one, SCOTUS ruling hits. Customs and Border Patrol halts collection cold. Importers, those big businesses who paid the duties, file protests within 180 days or request reliquidation from Customs, proving they shelled out on tariffed goods. Step 2. Treasury and Customs audit the claims, matching the harmonized tariff schedule codes, and cut checks or electronically wire the money. Oh, and the interest at 5.41% annual from the payment date. Nice perk for the corporations, huh? But the scale? Holy logistical hell, Batman. As of early September 2025, actual tariff revenue collected since April, let's get real numbers, not the administration's fairy tales. Trump loves bragging about trillions in revenue, like his August 31st claim that tariffs earn the U.S. trillions of dollars. Trillions? Forbes crunched the numbers. About $96 billion total since the tariffs kicked in, with August alone at about $28 billion. Fox Business says August hit $31.4 billion, up from $17.4 billion in April. Politico's tracker puts it at $158 billion. Still peanuts compared to the doomsday $750 to $1 trillion that Bessent hyped. So why the discrepancy? Because projections assume endless collections. But reality? Imports dipped as businesses rerouted supply chains, and not every tariff stuck. exemptions got nuked, but cheap Chinese junk still sneaks in. The admin inflates numbers to scare us into thinking it's winning, but it's a fraction of the pain inflicted. This refund undertaking, an unprecedented nightmare in the making. Millions of import entries since April. Forbes calls it a system-swamping event that could take years to sort out. Strain on customs like the IRS during tax Armageddon, spiking the deficit in our over $35 trillion debt pile. Bond markets would freak, yields jump, all thanks to tariff turmoil. Small businesses drown in paperwork. Giants like Walmart and Apple get a corporate Christmas card. And backups? National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett on CBS's Face the Nation smirks about other legal authorities, like Section 232 for national security tariffs on steel and aluminum and pharma. Hassett himself says there are other things that could happen should it go that way. This, of course, is code for other loopholes, because why fix a policy when you can double down? But here's where I really start to lose my temper. This whole refund dance proves the tariffs are theft. The government grabbed billions, let's say 100 billion, just to keep it simple, and now admits that it might have to give them back. But the refunds go straight to the importers' pockets. All the extras that consumers paid on their purchases don't come back to the consumers. If that doesn't upset you, then I guess you're just not paying attention. All this refunded loot, potentially swelling to hundreds of billions, won't touch the consumers who got to pay it in the first place. Tariffs aren't paid by evil foreigners. They're duties on U.S. importers who slap those costs right onto you at the checkout counter. The Tax Foundation said $1,300 per household this year. That's the average increase. That's your money stolen in plain sight. Funding a policy that's been garbage since Smoot-Hawley in the 1930s crashed the economy. Importers get the refunds. The retailers, manufacturers, the Walmarts of the world. They file, they cash in, end of story. No magic redistribution to the shoppers. Anyone who thinks that retailers like Walmart will then lower prices because of this windfall are living in fantasy land. There will be no magic distribution to shoppers. As trade lawyer Louis Arandia told Live Now from Fox on September 5th, quote, consumers unlikely to share in the windfall. No recourse for higher prices paid. Exactly. Those costs are baked into supply chains. Tariffs on Chinese steel, your car's pricier. Refund hits, company pockets it. End of the story. This is theft, pure and simple. The administration knew tariffs hurt Americans. Studies show 80 to 90% passed to consumers. And yet they peddled it as protection. Now, refunds will expose the scam. Money taken away unlawfully returned to the middlemen while families scrape by on inflated budgets. Class actions for unjust enrichment. Well, Forbes says those have slim odds of success. But the logistics of trying to make any sort of a valid estimation of what consumers would be owed what are virtually impossible. So in the end, consumers will get zero. When you couple that with the already extensive windfalls that wealthy corporations and billionaires were able to get through the big beautiful bill, and I guess it's clear it's been quite a year for the wealthy. All right, so let's wrap this up. SCOTUS quid void on IEEPA overreach and other major questions, this pure executive hubris that started these tariffs. Refunds will be a $1 trillion headache for the Customs and Border Patrol, with actual collections somewhere around $100 billion so far, nowhere near the administration's numbers. And we, the consumers, are left holding the bag, proving what we knew from the start, that tariffs were the wrong idea all along. So that wraps up our topics for this episode. And for those of you who stuck around long enough, or maybe fast forwarded, I do want to end on a high note. In honor of International Literacy Day, I want to tell you a story about a teacher. He was charismatic, well-liked, and passionate about his students. He taught history, coached sports, even taught driver's ed. His students graduated, went on to college, and came back years later to thank him. By all outward appearances, he was living the American dream, a respected educator shaping young minds. There was just one small detail. He couldn't read. Not struggling with reading, not had trouble with big words. He literally could not read. At least not above a second grade level. He kept his secret for 17 years as a teacher. This is a story of John Corcoran, and it's one of the most powerful stories of perseverance, transformation, and hope that I've ever heard. John grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was a bright, athletic kid, talkative, good with people, but when it came to reading, something just didn't click. He made it through the second grade, still sounding out words one painful letter at a time, and then school just kept on moving forward without him. By fourth grade, he'd figured out that he was different from other kids. They were reading chapter books and writing essays. John was memorizing what the teacher said, looking at his neighbor's papers, and surviving. And here's the part that will make you pause. John graduated high school and even college without ever really learning how to read or write. How? The same way a lot of people survive when they feel they don't belong. He compensated. He relied on charm, personality, and a photographic memory. He cheated on some tests, he copied some homework, sat near the smart kids, and he passed. When he got to college, his athletic ability earned him a scholarship. And once he was there, he found a way to get by, paying classmates to do his assignments, guessing on multiple choice tests, avoiding situations that would expose him. And then, incredibly, John became a teacher. Yes, a teacher. He taught social studies and driver's ed for 17 years. He carefully structured his classroom so that he never had to read out loud or write much on the board. He relied on oral teaching, invited guest speakers, and got very good at hiding his secret. But deep down, John felt trapped. He described it later as living with a big hole in his soul. He was helping students prepare for their futures, but inside he still felt like a scared kid who couldn't read a storybook. Then one day, in the late 1980s, John heard Barbara Bush, then the Second Lady of the United States, speaking about adult literacy. For some reason, that moment struck him like lightning. Instead of living in shame for the rest of his life, he decided to do something terrifying. He asked for help. He walked into a library and signed up for a literacy program. He was paired with a tutor, a 65-year-old woman named Eleanor, and for the first time in his life, he sat down to really learn how to read. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. John spent years working with Eleanor and other tutors, moving from a 2nd grade reading level to a 6th grade reading level in about a year, continuing from there until he could read and write with confidence. He was 48 years old by the time he felt truly literate. And then something incredible happened. Instead of hiding this part of his life, John decided to share it with the world. He told a story on Oprah, 2020, and Larry King Live. He wrote a book called The Teacher Who Couldn't Read. And he started the John Corcoran Foundation to help other adults who never had the chance or the right instruction to learn to read. Today, that foundation trains tutors, partners with schools, and uses evidence-based programs to make sure no one else has to live with that same secret. And here's why I love this story. John Corcoran's journey reminds us that literacy isn't just about books or grades or passing tests. It's about dignity. It's about being able to read your own medical instructions, to fill out a job application, to read to your children at night. And most importantly, it's about hope. Because if John could go from not reading at all to becoming a published author and a literacy advocate, then it's never too late for anyone. It's never too late to learn. It's never too late to grow. And it's never too late to change your life. If you've been holding back from learning something new because you think it's too late, let John's story be a reminder. You're not too old. You're not too far behind. And you're certainly not alone. Because somewhere out there is a teacher like Eleanor waiting to help. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. I want to thank all of you who took the time to download and listen to my rants. And I would love for you to reach out and tell me what you thought, or any questions or comments that you have. You can do that by using any one of the social media platforms for the podcast. The links to those are all on our Linktree page, and the address for the Linktree page is on the podcast description. You can also reach out by email. The email address is neighboroutleftpodcast@gmail.com. We'll be back on Friday with another installment of Back Porch Files. So until then, keep engaged, keep reading, and as always, have the week you voted for.